The views and opinions expressed by the guests and hosts of this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the Lansdowne Public Library or its affiliates.
Welcome to the Lansdowne Public Library's Geek Out podcast,
where we geek out about just about anything.
I'm Dave.
I'm Jeff.
And we have a very special guest with us this week.
Hi, my name's Michael Sheehan, and I've been working at the library for 50 years, and that's why they invited me.
Yeah, we're doing something a little different this month. This year is the library's 125th anniversary, which apparently is a quasi-quicentennial. Quasi-quicentennial. There's no spare I there. If your Latin's better than mine, feel free to fix that. Yeah, so we thought we'd bring Mike in to talk about his time here at the library.
Indeed. In fact, it was just the other day someone was actually asking, I believe it was Saturday, someone came up and asked if, one, we were related. And I said, no, but guess what? He's still here. So you're pretty popular around these parts.
I shouldn't be, but I am. Thank you.
Well, for the right reasons.
All right. So, do you want me to just get started? Sure. Or you have questions you want to ask? I am not here to give a history of the library. I'm here to talk about how the library was 50 years ago and how it's changed over time. And some of the changes are pretty obvious. But I started coming here long before that. I was a 5-year-old, so that's 65 years ago, coming to the children's library. And that library was right on the other side of the current building. And the children had a backdoor entrance. We were not allowed to come in the front, and we went up the stairs to the second floor where the children's room was. Back then, if you had a late book, the fines were for adults 2 cents a day, and for children 1 cent a day. So that's obviously an inflationary change that has occurred. One of the obvious things about how the library has changed is we're part of the Delaware County system now. And that's really important for us because it multiplies all the resources that we have as we're able to share with each other and not necessarily have to spend money duplicating services. We have interlibrary loan, all kinds of services that are really great. Back then, we were not part of a system. All the libraries that you can go to in the Delaware County system were individual small-town libraries, and we kind of liked it that way. We thought it had small-town charm. We knew everybody who came in the door. The people who worked there had been working there for 25, 35, 40 years themselves. And so it was a very comfortable feeling. And Philadelphia, the Free Library of Philadelphia, eventually came to Delaware County librarians and said, you got to organize. You got to form a system because there's too much duplication and you could be much more efficient and provide better service. There was hesitation on that because we didn't want to lose the small town feel. We thought, oh, no, we'll be part of a system and it won't be the same. But we probably managed to maintain a lot of the still small-town quality at the same time being very professional and providing the services that, as a system, we can do. I mean, I'll give you an example. Lucille does the ILLs. We didn't have ILLs back then. Well, yes, we did, but we didn't do them. We gathered the paperwork and sent it to the Free Library of Philadelphia. They got the ILL book, sent it to us, and we gave it to the patron. So Philadelphia was fulfilling a lot of the system requirements, and they finally said, we can't keep doing this. You have to. Now, there was hesitation, and for some people you might say, well, why would you hesitate? It's going to make things better. Again, change is a difficult thing to sometimes deal with. I was an English teacher in my other life, and have you ever read Dostoevsky's Notes from Underground?
Not.
All right, you should. It's a great novella, but one of the key lines in it, the underground man is a very spiteful, dark character. And he says, I refuse to accept that 2 plus 2 equals 4, because 2 plus 2 equals 4 is a wall. And what he meant by that is you can't make change unless you're able to imagine a different reality. Or say I say 2 plus 2 equals 11. You'll smile at me and say, it really equals 4, because you know it equals 4. You can't imagine a world where it doesn't equal 4. Well, let me give you another example that's not mathematical. Women can't be engineers. They don't have that kind of mind. That was a 2 plus 2 equals 4. People believed that. And therefore, we could not imagine a world where women would be doctors, women would be engineers, women would be maybe president of the United States one day. We could not imagine it. And the only way to do that is to refuse to accept what is, you're told, is the truth, is the reality, and imagine a different reality. So 2 plus 2 equals 17 means that women can do anything. That a black man could become president of the United States, that things that we could not imagine or accept because we had put up a wall that says, this is the truth and we can't think of anything beyond that. So sometimes it's hard to address change, and there was hesitation. But obviously the system is running and running well, and I think everybody is pleased with the change. And we also feel that we represent Lansdowne very well, that we have friends here who come in all the time, and that's what's really important to us. The obvious other difference, and I'm sitting here in front of one, is computers.
Yeah, that's a pretty big change.
If you were in the library on an afternoon and early evening, you'd see 50, 75 kids because they didn't do their homework on computers. They came to the library. Research was done with books. And so you had to be a much more active part of it. Now we plunk them in front of the computer and say, find it. And they pretty much can. Back then, you'd say, all right, you're doing a report on the Civil War. Let's go back to the history section, 973.6, and we'll find you books on the Civil War. What battle are you doing? We go through the index, and we would help them through the process, sit them down then once with 2 or 3 or 4 books, and then they would do the work on their own. But we were a much more active part of their research than we are now. Computers are a blessing, but they also have taken something away from us, and that's okay. But again, the world was different back then for the very simple reason that a kid couldn't just sit down at his computer at home and do what he needs to do. Helping with homework was a much higher percentage of our work back then than it is today. At least I think so. One of the key differences is also programming. Most of the programming we did back then was for children. You would try and do adult programming, but they were usually one-on, one-off things, a speaker coming in, etc. But it was hard to get people to come in. For some reason, it just wasn't a part of the mindset. Now, what do we have? We have 5 or 6 or 7 book clubs. We have the history forum that I do. We have a meditation group. We have all kinds of children's programming going on in the library. Programming is one of the most important things that we do. I mean, we had the standard story hour. We did that. But even that's changed. Back in the day, I used to do story hours 50 years ago. We would take the children into a back room. The parents would stay out in the main room of the library, and we'd do the story hour. Now, the parents are a part of the story hour, and it's hard to imagine them. I think that's a big improvement.
Yeah.
But the idea was these kids were supposed to be learning how to handle themselves in a social semi-quasi-educational situation, and they had to sit there quietly, etc. And now it's much more lively, much more fun, I think. One of the joys that I have still working here is I've been allowed to do story hours again. And it's the highlight of my week in the library. It's what I like to do more than any, I'll do the work at the desk and I'll do the shelving. Reading books to the kids is just fun. And we sing songs and we just have fun. And they all know me and I know them and we have a great relationship. So it's one of the highlights. But the amount of programming is significantly different. Actually, I have a hand in getting adult programming going. The History Forum started in 1987. Oh,
wow.
Yeah. It was the bicentennial. That's an easy word.
Yeah, that one's so much easier.
It's the bicentennial of the Constitution. And we had a worker here, a great lady named Ruth Nelson. One of the things I want to accomplish in this podcast is to repeat names that at one time were very familiar to every visitor to the library, but to the people sitting in front of me, they don't know these names. Well, Ruth Nelson said we ought to honor the bicentennial of the Constitution. So she got out books on the Constitution, wrote all kinds of questions, and created a quiz program. Every library was to have a team of 3 people. In this library, I was asked to form a team, and I called on Neil Ronk, who was later a member of the Board of Trustees, and John Bloom, a Civil War expert. And we were the team representing Lansdowne. Every week, two libraries would face off. The winner would go on to the next one and the next one until finally you had one winner. And we won. And we had put in a lot of work in preparing it. And we said all that effort shouldn't go to waste. Yeah. So we put together 5 presentations on the history of the constitutional period in America. And we had about 22, 23, 25 people come. And when we finished the 5th one, they said, could you continue? So we did. And that's 87, that's almost 37 years ago. 37 years ago. Yes. And again, I thank Ruth Nelson from the depths because I've always been interested in history, but this forced me to be disciplined, constantly reading history, constantly learning new things, and trying to synthesize it so that in a 90-minute to 2-hour presentation, people could get a good grasp of what it was. Right now in the History Forum, I'm having an exciting time for me. It's going to be like a 5-year project, and I'm in the 3rd year of it, and it might even go beyond that. I'm doing the history of my lifetime, starting from the Cold War in the 50s and we'll go up to at least January 6th. Maybe we'll do the Gaza War. And one of the things that is amazing to me, I knew more history that occurred before I was born than I did during my lifetime, because I'm busy and it's newspaper headlines and I didn't follow it. I could give you a paragraph on a topic, but now I'm forced to give 90 minutes. And so I really got to say, what really went on? What was going on behind the scenes? What did I not notice? And most of us don't notice 80%, 90% of what's going on around us because we're too busy.
Especially if it's happening somewhere else. It's easy to keep up to at least some extent with what's happening locally and even in America. But, I feel like, for example, when I went to high school, I stopped learning about Egypt by the time the last pharaoh was dead. We didn't care about it after that. It was only covered as ancient history.
One of my lines I used to say to my students is, I'm so old that my first history class was called Current Events. Yeah. But that history forum has been great for me. It's kept me reading, kept me thinking, kept me trying to understand the world that I live in ways that maybe I wouldn't have done if that had not come about. And that only came about because it was something that an opportunity the library offered to me. Again, Ruth Nelson, thank you very, very much. And for those of you who remember her, think well and kindly of her. She was a great, wonderful lady. I guess so much has changed. The computers, the programming. It was much more hands-on back then. Summer reading club. They have a summer reading club. They've had it forever and ever. Now it's handled basically outside of the library.
It's a DE thing. It's an us thing.
Yes, it is. And what we used to do is the kids came in every week. They were told what the topic for this week's book was. Maybe it's a biography. Maybe it's a mystery story, whatever it might be. And they would read. They come in. They talk about it. Then we would do a craft. And then at the end of the summer, we would get a play and we'd rehearse the kids in the play and call the parents in and we'd put on the play. It was a great time. They had a great time to it. This is not an old fogey saying I don't like the way it's done now. I understand why it's done the way it is now, but there was more fun, more connection in that way. But progress always has its cost. If you want to improve things, you have to pay a price for it. You want air travel? Well, the air's going to be full of gasoline fumes. That's just that's the way it is. But you can get from here to Boston in a very short time. And this is a silly thing, but I'm going to say it anyway. One of the great multipliers of crime in the 20th century was the mass production of the automobile.
Yeah.
Because you could rob a bank in one town, and 10 minutes later, you're miles and miles away. When you're on foot, you can't do that. So progress has its costs. There will be good things that you get out of it, and the system has been great for us. We get books from all over the country. We can get our patrons, if a book's in Upper Darby and that's inconvenient for them, we can have it sent here. There are so many ways that we can better serve the community there. I also want to talk about, and I think we do it maybe as well as we did back then, but it was much more of a focus back then. I was reading once, one of the keys to happiness are those small incidental events where you're on your daily walk to work and you cross a corner where there's a guy selling newspapers, and every day you don't even talk to him, you don't even know his name, you tip your hat to him or you nod to him, he smiles at you and you go on. They've done studies where if he's not there, it throws off your day.
Yeah.
And you're not as happy. In the library, we have so many of those incidents. People come in, and maybe you don't know their name, and maybe you do, but you nod and you smile, and maybe you say something funny, or I say something funny. But those little things, they're not what the library is here for, but they are one of the real benefits of a community library.
There's always value in being able to go and see a familiar face.
Yeah. But it changes our temperature. It makes us happier. And it's not like, oh, it's my best friend that I'm seeing. It's an acquaintance that you pass, but you pass regularly, and they respond to you with a smile. Nothing more than that. But it makes a difference. I don't want us to get to the point where it's that kind of artificial Walmart, hello, glad to see you. But the kind of genuine, human, quick interactions matter to the world, and the library is one of the places where they happen. It's what happens in a story hour. It's not the reading of the stories per se. It's not the songs that you sing. You know all the kids in there. I mean, I could tell you the kids who come regularly. Those are great kids. The connections are very, very important. And I think that probably because I've been here so long, that's a higher priority for me than maybe it is for somebody else. Because I remember when that was almost 80% of what you were doing. When I worked in the children's room mostly. I worked both in the adult and in the children's. But in the children's room, I knew the kids. I knew what books they liked. When we were getting a new book, I'd say, this is one you got to sit down with. And they would come in and ask you for the suggestions all the time. Again, that was the small town feel I was talking about, that kind of charm of, hey, we're all friends here. And I still feel that about the library. It's more professional. There's a lot more things going on. And the computer is taking, I don't know what percentage it is, but a significant percentage come in to say, can I get on a computer?
Yeah.
And those almost the extent of your interaction, unless they need help, some technical issue that they're having or a problem that they're having. But quite often it's just, they come in, they sit down, do what they do, come up and say, I have a print on number 4, and you print for them, which is important and needs to get done. But, other things are also important.
Exactly. And it's not quite as memorable an experience as helping somebody find that or any of the program stuff.
But it's also nice to have a place that if you need to get something done, you can get it done. And even if you don't need help getting it done, if there's some people that you can rely on to try their best to help out, that feeling of somebody's here, somebody can help, does magnitudes of work. And for a community library to provide that, I think is just what makes it such a pillar of the community.
Yeah. Well, obviously I agree, because that's kind of a lot of what I've been trying to say here. One of the reasons I've been here 50 years is I'm happy when I'm here. What was it? Winnie the Pooh looks for his happy place? Well, this is a happy place for a lot of people, for me included. I could have retired from this many, many years ago, but I always liked the connection. And now that I am retired from full-time teaching and working here more hours, I know the rest of the staff better. For a long time, your name was Dave, that's all I knew about you. And your name was Jeff, and I knew less about you. And there was Alex, and I knew he was tall. Other than that,
I knew you worked Monday nights, and that was it.
That was it.
I never saw you unless I had to come in, and even then...
Yeah, I guess for probably the first year or two that I worked here, I only saw you at meetings. Because we just never had hours that overlap.
No. And at one point when I started working full-time, I worked Monday through Friday nights and Saturdays every week. And they gradually winnowed down. And then I was just one night a week on Mondays. And my wife thought, well, you're only one night a week, why don't you retire? But I liked the connection. And now I'm able to put in, 15 to 20 or so hours a week. That's plenty of time, and I know you guys. I know Cassandra. I know Vicky and Lucille and Margie and all the people here. And I know them. Well, of course, Margie, I've worked with for many, many years. It is a pleasure, and we have a staff that is a real mix. The shift that I work with, we're the 370-year-olds, Vicky, Lucille, myself, and yet we're a good staff. We work well together, and we get all the things done that need to get done. And then there's a lot of people that, again, playing the old guy here, are kids to me. And I think you need that mix. I think that's important in any institution.
It allows you to get different skill sets and different points of view. In a place like that, that's vital, because there are patrons that are going to walk in the door and ask for a book recommendation, and I'm going to point them basically exclusively to sci-fi and horror, and they might not want any. But those are the books I read. Those are what I can tell them about. I check the bestsellers list and all that, but having people, if somebody comes in asking about history, you're the person to point them to, because you're going to find them probably something that they didn't know existed that was exactly what they were looking for.
And again, obviously, there are some people who are very talented with technology, and we lean on those people. Yeah. That's just, but in any, I don't care whether you're a business or you're a community library or whatever you are, if all the staff is 70 and above, that's not a good situation. If all the staff is 20 to 25, that's not a good situation. You need that mix in there. They feed off of each other, and it makes it a better experience for everybody who comes in, I think. I'll give you a piece of trivia, and you're not going to know the answer. I am telling you right up front, you will not know the answer.
All right.
Who was the oldest person to work at the library, and what age was this person? Guess the age, because you're not going to know the name.
Well, I'd like to take a stab. The name wouldn't happen to be the same one above the plaque at the YA room, would it?
No.
Okay, fair enough. Toss out 87. That sounds like a fun.
Yeah, try 98.
93 was my other guess.
Louise Startzman worked here for many, many years. Kept working until she began working here after she retired, and stayed here until she was 98. To give you an idea historically where she would be placed, her husband fought in the Spanish-American War, which is in 1898. Yeah. And that moves me in the direction is my second purpose for being here. This isn't about me. It's about the people that I know, that I knew, who worked here, and that maybe, look, X number of years from now, people are going to forget that I worked here. It's just a reality of things. There are people, the people I'm going to mention, you don't know their names, but they worked here for 25, 35, 40 years. They were the library. They built the library. And I think they should be remembered, especially as we are celebrating the 125th, are coming up to that celebration. And one of them is Louise Startzman, 98, still working. And I found that she was amazing. She lived right off of on Stewart Avenue and would walk to work and walk back home. And I think that the library did wonderful things for her because in order to be able to work to that age, you have to be in an environment that feeds you. And it did. We are in the Bainey room. I knew Herman Bainey very well. Herman Bainey was a retired engineer, very, very successful man. He was a widower, and his wife was from England, and he funded a library in England. And when they moved to Lansdowne, he decided to do the same here. He lived on Stratford Avenue. He walked here almost every day. He would come in with catalogs, the pages torn out, and he would go to Mary Buchanan, who was the library director, and say, I want you to buy these books. And he would provide a check and do that. He literally bought thousands of books for the library. I mean, it was his daily walk here. And with it, he had gone through catalogs, picked the books, and all kinds of topics that interested him. He was not just only history it was everything. And he was a wonderful man. His wife's picture is there, and his picture is here in the Bainey room. The name that bears his name, and his name is on it because he was the biggest donor to the building fund. For those of you so young don't realize, we used to be in the library building next door, and for years and years and years we were holding bake sales and whatnot to try and raise money to build a new library, and finally we did. And his contribution was the largest contribution towards that end, and we have the Bainey room. One of the things about the passage of time is, right now this is called the Bainey room. Might we someday change the name? Yeah, we could. Someone else does something and you want to memorialize them and thank them, so you do. If you go to the YA room, it's called the Ronnie Hawkins Young Adult Room.
Yep.
Yeah, that's its second name. It was the Mary Case Buchanan Quiet Room before it was the Ronnie Hawkins YA room. Mary was the director that I worked for when I began. And she probably was director, I don't know the number of years, but I'm going to guess around 25. And she was the assistant director for years before that. I mean, basically, she gave her adult life to the library, and she was a very quiet, wonderful woman. I know a name on a plaque doesn't really memorialize somebody. It's a name on a plaque. But she is somebody, again, one of the reasons I'm here is I want people my age and older to say, oh, yeah, I remember Mary Buchanan. What a wonderful woman. Just a beautiful woman. And again, I know I can be staring at blank faces. You don't know who I'm talking about. And that's reasonable. We all get forgotten. But, yeah, given this opportunity, I'm going to say, remember Mary Case Buchanan. She deserves to. She was preceded by Gertrude Taylor, who worked here as the director for a ton of years, probably another 25 years. And she basically taught Mary Buchanan the ropes for doing the job. You're looking quizzically like you know her?
I might, actually. My next-door neighbor when I was young was a Gertrude. We called her Gert. And I know she used to be a librarian, but I wasn't sure where.
It could well be that we're talking about the same one. Were you in Lansdowne?
No, I was in Sharon Hill.
In her later years, she lived in Lansdowne. I don't know if she lived in Sharon Hill before.
I don't know. She moved away when I was like 9, give or take. Yeah. Could be a completely different person. It would be very fascinating, but ends up it's the same.
Can't be that many librarians named Gertrude in the same county, could there?
You never know.
She built the core collection. A lot of the books that she bought, even though as old as that is, they're still here.
Oh, yeah.
And it really served the library well. She did. I knew her when I was a kid coming in. By the time I was working here, she was retired, but I also knew her, outside of the building. And she is one of the architects of the Lansdowne Public Library. I don't think the library would be here today in the shape that it is without those two women. And that is one of the things that is true about libraries in general. Over the years, it's women who have built them.
Oh, yeah.
And usually underpaid women, but it's women who have done that core work that made libraries function. It's changing a little bit now. Obviously, our director is Bill Patterson. But if you went down the history of our librarians, I think he's the only man. I mean, I could be wrong on that, but I think he's the only male. And sometimes I am trying, both to remember and give credit to these women who did remarkable work. Another person who did remarkable work was Betty Marlino. She didn't work for the library. There's a plaque out there, the Betty Marlino Service Award. And the first name on that plaque is it's mine. And she was the head of the Board of Trustees, what Marie Camposano is doing now. But she basically trained Marie, and she, 25 or 30 years. And she was trained by Mrs. Brown, and Mrs. Brown was the head of the Board of Trustees for another couple of decades. So the string of connections are very, very, very long. One of the changes in the world of the Lansdowne Public Library is my term of service is extraordinarily long. That's not what most did. But we had a lot of women, largely, who were here for 20, 25, 30 years of service. And the changeover in who's on the staff was very slow. Another woman, Flora Beamer, retired to go into teaching. That's how I got the job. But mostly you would see these women. I saw them when I was a 5-year-old, and I saw them still here when I was working here. The same crew. Turnover is much more rapid now.
Yeah, unfortunately, in some cases.
Yeah, and seriously, it is the way of the world in a whole lot of businesses. But there was a steadiness, consistency. When you walked in that door, you knew who you were going to see. Prior to my staying as long as I have, Louise Peck was the longest serving member of the library. She worked as Mary Buchanan's second in command. She was a very strong personality. And if there was quiet to be kept, she was the one who would get it kept. Back in the days where library's a quiet place, she knew how to keep it that way. But she was very, very efficient, very good at her job. And when you got to know her, a very wonderful person. And she lived on Owen Avenue. Again, these are all streets that most of us in Lansdowne know. And again, she was, I don't know how many decades she was here, but she was, when she retired, the longest serving person at the Lansdowne Public Library. And again, a name that everyone my age knew. A face everyone my age knew. And nobody in this room has the slightest idea of who she was. And that, again, that's okay. Again, as I said earlier, in some handful of years, people are going to forget that I worked here. That's the way it is.
Indeed, at least. Especially with working with the kids. Kids remember.
Yeah.
So that's the thing. If I had lived here, I might remember some of these folk, but I grew up in Sharon Hill. I remember most of them. If I saw any of my old librarians, I'd know them instantly.
Yeah.
I've worked with a couple of them briefly.
We were talking about those moments where you just feel happier because you nod to somebody. I will see somebody come in the library. It happened just last week. 2 people came in that I hadn't seen in probably 35 years. And they came in. You're still here. Yeah. And I felt great. And they felt pretty good. And, I get, there's a girl, I'm calling her a girl, a woman named Lisa Petronella. Comes in all the time.
Sure.
I knew her when she was this tall. And those of you listening to the podcast can't see how tall I'm saying. But she was a child. And when I see her come in, I immediately feel a little better. Yeah. She's one of the ones who remembers me back when, and I think that's cool. There was the children's librarian for what we used to say 100 years. It wasn't that long, obviously, named Betty Stahl. And one of the things she was famous for, she read every book in the children's room. She made it her task. She read every book in there, and as every new book came in, she did it. And she was the children's librarian for a long, long time, all through my childhood and long before we moved to Lansdowne. If I were to say one of the things that has been best for me in my resurgence of working here more hours is the opportunity to do the story hour. All those kids are such wonderful kids. The moms are wonderful. I have a great time doing it. Maria was the one who... She said, anybody want to help out with some things in the children's room? And I jumped at it. I'm not sure she thought I would be able to do the story hour because you have to be entertaining for kids. Yeah. So what we did was, this is when we were doing the COVID era, we were doing the story hours at the park. Sycamore Tree Park, whatever they call it. She read 2 books and I read 1. And then she said, you can have Thursdays. And I said, thank you very much. I will do that. I think the greatest pleasures I get out of the library now in what I'm doing is in the programming. I love doing the history forum. I've enjoyed doing the live readings that Alex puts together. Doing the story hour is the best. The group we have for the Mondays Are Murder, it's a wonderful group. And I put in a lot of work on those things. In order to prepare for it, I will do hours and hours of reading and note-taking, but it all... A, that's good for me. It keeps my mind active. And B, at the end result, I with the group of people that surrounds me in those various programs, I get great feedback and I feel wonderful doing it. And I think it is one of the most exciting parts of the library that we have so many of these kinds of programs, because the world is not the world of books, which is the world I grew up in. It is the world of computer and media and multimedia and bells and whistles and all kinds of things. And you need to respond to people in different ways than you would have done so I started here in 1974. A whole different set of responses to the people who come in, a whole different set of expectations. And I think the library has grown enormously in those 50 years. It still has a lot of the charm of this is Lansdowne Public Library, but it also works to meet more needs of its clientele than it did when I was beginning my time here. One of the things that I remember during the summer, doing the summer reading club, we would always do the play, as I mentioned earlier. And every year, one kid would drop out the day or two before we were going to do the play. And I was the substitute performer. So I was in more plays than any of the kids. That would happen all the time. I still get a thrill when somebody comes in and, you're still here. And I think that's cool. Someone came in a couple of months ago. Michael Shinn still work here? And I got a note left for me and all that. And I knew who the girl was immediately. Because one of the things that I think is true, doesn't mean it's true, is that because of the nature of a non-computer world, we got to know the kids better. In the story hour, I still have that. I'll see EJ on the street and he'll want to bump fists and say hi. And that kind of connection still gets made in moments like that. But almost every child who came in the library knew me. I'm going to tell a story that may sound sad, but I don't want it to. And I'm not going to use the girl's name. We were talking about various things, and she turned to me and said, my mommy died. And I tried to handle it very well. Later, she was with her grandmother. Her grandmother said, thank you. You're the first person she's told.
Jeez.
Because it was something bottled up in her, didn't know how to talk about it, and we were friendly enough with each other that she felt comfortable that she could let that come out. And, again, a library is not a building full of computers and books. It means more to people than that if you're doing it right. And this is not to pat myself on the shoulder, but I think that's one of the things I do right, that I make connections with people, that I use humor, I do all kinds of other things with, but people know that I like them, and then they respond back the same way. And occasionally you have moments like that one with that young girl. And when it was over, I had to take a couple of deep breaths because it was a moment. It was a moment that was very significant, and nobody else knows about it other than now they know about it. That was probably 45 years ago. I remember it. I can see the girl's face. I know her name. I know all of that. And that was very, very important. We had a young boy who used to come in, and he was, I don't know the right term today, is it mentally challenged, but he loved me, and he responded to me. And so he'd come in, and we'd sit down and talk. And I'd help him find books, and we'd do it. And it was just, it's just a feel-good thing. Sometimes I think, because the world is so frenetic and rushed and things got to get done, we don't have the space for enough of those kinds of moments. It's not that they're completely lacking, but I think they're really important moments. I do believe what I said earlier, that it is in those small connections that people's happiness meters move up more than, I need a book on the Civil War, can you help me find it? Oh, yeah, I can. But that doesn't change things, doesn't matter in any significant way. And I think especially with kids, I like to work with kids, with the 4 and the 5 and the 3-year-olds. And they are very responsive, and that makes me feel good, and they feel good. And I think I've been talking a lot tonight about the library as a place where you can feel good. And I think that is why I've been able to stay here for 50 years, because the people here make me feel good. And I like to think that I give some of that back to them. And that's really, really important to me. I think there's another person that I want to mention. When I started here, the children's librarian's name was Helen Doherty, maybe the nicest lady I ever met. She made my transition to working here very, very easy and treated me like family. I got to know her daughters, got to know her husband, and she just was a wonderful person, did a great job working in the library. And there are, again, people my age who know who she is, and there's the majority of people who don't. But she was a wonderful person to work with. Another person we had was a man named Tom Harrison. Tom Harrison was the head of the Haverford School District Library. Very, very, very smart man. He was a Southern gentleman. He was our reference librarian in the evenings. So he worked all day at school and then worked at night. Yeah. Well, again, that's the world I lived. I worked full-time teaching and then came here 5 nights a week and worked Saturdays. And then when they started opening on Sundays, I'd have to do a Sunday a month. So there was a time when I was working a lot. And then there was a time when I was working less. And now I'm back to a good amount. I think this 15, 20 hours is a very, very good amount for me. We're about to celebrate our 125th anniversary for the library. We had major celebrations at the 75th anniversary and the 100th anniversary of the library. And as I told you guys before the podcast began, I was the speaker at both of those events. First one because I was the youngest person on the staff and willing to talk, and the staff was old. I told you Louise Startzman was 98. Now, she was the oldest, but there were old people here. And now I think of them as young. At the second one, the 100th anniversary, my theme was a simple one. I have loved the library because here I met so many friends who became such good teachers, and I met so many teachers who became such good friends. And the friends and the teachers were A, the books, and B, the people, or A, the people, and B, the books. I learned so much within the walls of this building and more particularly the other building where the library began for me, that I think the library has given me back a whole lot. And in a minor piece of trivia, my mother, when she was a teenager, worked at the Lansdowne Public Library. So somehow it seems to be something in the blood. But if you look at my life, I started coming here when I was 5. I'm almost 71, so 65, 66 years. This library has been a part of my life. I lived in Lansdowne for over 50 years. And, on some very, very, very regular basis, I was here either working or coming to the library to use it. So it's been very important to me. And I guess I would throw this in your direction because I thought we should throw a curveball in here. What do you guys think about working here in the library? You have a whole different perspective because you were, 7 years old?
Relatively.
Okay. What has the experience of the library been for you? And how long have you been here?
Well, my dad used to take me here. Let's go back. I used to come here and I would check out Ricky Ricotta and his Mighty Robot and Time Warp Trio books. And I do remember, and this was, my age is shown by my library card. It still has the sun on it, which is like, I want to say around 2000 or so. And I remember coming here and I remember Dawn was still working at the front desk. Mm-hmm. And putting that together is like, oh, yeah, no, she was the library. You're talking about libraries have been here forever. Dawn was here forever, it feels like. And so that was early 2000s. And then it was 2015 I started actually working here. February of 2015. So minus some on or offs, that's pretty much what it's been. You know what? I'd say the library has been a lot. I've met a lot of amazing people. I think I've grown to learn. It changed me as a person, I'd say. Because I think now when I think of going to the library, from my perspective of working here, I've learned a lot on how people find things, whether it's in the library or whether it's on a computer. I've found ways to help people in all sorts of different things, research, just helping people remember how to do things, teaching them how to do things. Because a lot of times you help kids write reports. I help people figure out the printing machine, the copier.
Sure.
How to do that, how to do it easier. So it's not just, you have 50 pages, you need them all copied. Well, don't do one at a time on the glass. Let me show you how the feeder works. And some people get it, other people not so much. But you know what? A lot of them have really great personalities, so I don't mind helping.
You're talking about your card, shows how old you are, how long you've been here. The way the cards were before is they were blue, rectangular cards, cardboard, or whatever, and salmon meant you were a child, and blue meant you were an adult, and they had a case on the desk, and you would come up, you didn't have your card. What's your name? Dave, and they pull your card out, and it'd have a number on it. We'd write the number in the card that was in the book, have a stamp to stamp the date, and stamp how many books you checked out, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, put it back in there, and then you'd fill up that card, and Dave, it's time to get a new card. And we'd make you a new card. And that's how we did things back then. All the mechanics of the library are different. Everything was done by hand. Everything was done handwriting. And of course, every book had a pocket, and the pocket had a card in it, and you pulled that out and stamped that. Maybe you're old enough to remember doing that, or maybe not. I don't know.
I don't know if I've ever done that. Especially because for at least the very beginning, I would come here with my dad. So he would take care of that, mostly because I couldn't reach the top of the counter. I knew I could hold a book.
Can you now?
Oh, it's tough. It's tough.
Okay.
Tiptoes.
But yeah, I've never used them, but I know exactly what it is because most of our books still have them. And a lot of books from other libraries still have them.
And there was a funny thing in terms of the way memory works. A lot of memory is physical. Someone would come in, and I'd close my eyes and reach over and say, their card's in here. If I remembered their name, obviously, but if I didn't remember their name, it's here. And I'd look through and I'd spot their name. Yeah, just silly little games that you play. But there you go.
Absolutely.
I'm a little older than you, so my first library card was a piece of cardboard with a chunk of metal in it.
Okay.
That I think was some sort of magnetic strip or something similar was how that worked. By the time I started working in libraries, those had long since passed. I still vividly remember the ka-chunk sound it made when the librarian would put it into whatever machine it was over at Sharon Hill that read that. I lived basically half a block from the Sharon Hill Library. Most of my childhood memories are in that building. I did science in the summer every year. I read every book they had on mythology. I donated books after my family became something family, I forget what the term was. But basically, Penguin would send us books to see, hey, if we put these out on market, will people buy them? So I was getting books before they were released, and I was still going to the library to talk to people about those books.
We had a young girl who used to come into the children's room every day in the building next door after school and stay there until the library used to close at 5:30 and then open up again at 7. And so she'd stay till 5:30 and go. And then later, we had some books that she had written. She wrote books for teenagers who were hesitant readers. So they were kind of high interest, easy to read, fast moving, relevant to the kinds of lives that people are really living. In my time here, there are certain writers that I have come to recognize as having a significance beyond their literary talent. One of them is Judy Blume. Judy Blume changed books for children. She may not be the greatest writer in the world. I don't care what you think of her, but she changed children's literature. It became about things that mattered to kids. In the early days, children's literature was basically moral tales to help you lead a good life. And so they were kind of preachy and sermonizing, and if they were all you had to read, you liked them. But they were all you had to read. She wrote about what it was really like to be a kid, to be an outsider, to have problems, to have parents who are getting a divorce, whatever it might be. Now there's a whole canon of people who have followed in the path that she trailblazed, but she changed the world of children's literature. And, again, whether you think one writer is better than her or another, nobody's as important, I think, in that field as she was. And her books are still being read.
Every now and then I feel like you get one that really hits for kids. Like, she literally changed the face of children's literature, and then you'll have somebody like R.L. Stine, who, for my age group, that was insane. Like, I'm sure there were horror stories for kids prior to him, but nothing quite the same. And if there's one thing I can say about myself and most of my friends when we were kids is horror was what we wanted. Nobody was giving it to us.
And he was writing 2 books a month.
Yeah.
So you had a constant supply.
Exactly. Like it is one of those things that I can't think of a time in my life that I had it easier to just be like, oh, good, there's just the new R.L. Stine. I'll read this.
Well, and I think one of the things about libraries and children is, just as you said, you remember your librarian if you saw her. There are books that, as a kid, you got lost in. I read all the Hardy Boy books. I read all the Chip Hilton books. I still remember them. And probably somebody today is not going to not going to find those books to be, a staple of their reading. But boy, I ate them up.
I think you're surprised. I know for a fact we have one girl who's here who has read basically every one of those.
Yes, I know who you're talking about, and yes, she has.
She's quite the prolific reader. And, you talk about the patrons you remember. I've only known her for maybe 3 years, and I still look at her and I'm like, I remember when she was, she's still only this tall, but I remember when she was only this tall.
I'm going to tell a silly story. I used to do the interlibrary loans, sending them to Philadelphia. And there was this one woman who every week or month or whenever she finished a book, would get another book. I know they were always on Hawaii, but they were on the geology of Hawaii, the history of Hawaii, the culture of Hawaii, cooking in Hawaii, any aspect of Hawaii that you could imagine. And literally, I got her 75, 100 books, all on Hawaii. And finally, I said to her, what got you so interested in Hawaii? Do you know the singer Don Ho? Tiny Bubbles. She said, I saw him in concert once, and he's from Hawaii. and so she now knows more about Hawaii than Don Ho ever knew. And Don Ho, you never know where the inspiration comes from because it's just people are what they are.
Sometimes you just get that idea in your head. If my parents had to buy all of the Goosebumps books I wanted as a kid, we'd probably lost the house because it would have been filled with books for one. Not that isn't already kind of true.
Yeah, my house, I could invite you to. It's the same.
I think every generation has another person that furthers, especially with children's literature. I would say early 2000s, for especially younger kids, because I remember it, Dave Filkey.
Yep.
Like I said, Ricky Ricotta, but Captain Underpants was instrumental. And much like, we want horror, R.L. Stine, or, we want stuff about us. Maybe I want books about funny things, like farts or whatever. But it was exactly. But you know what? It was still a story. I remember reading all of them and thinking about it. He followed good story beats. It's not just toilet humor, and there's a lot thrown into it. My dad always got a kick out of that. The school they go to is Jerome Horwitz, which was Curly of the Three Stooges' real name. And I think nowadays, when I think, first of all, Pilkey is still a juggernaut. He's still going with his Dogmans. But I also think of Diary of a Wimpy Kid.
Yep. Yeah. What are there, 17 of them now, or something like that?
Yeah. And there's that, and there's Dork Diaries, which is sort of a similar, in a similar vein. But it's every generation, I think, is another person that, and I say another person, like, it's only one. It's not. There's
because we had I talk about Goosebumps, sure, but also Animorphs was around that same period, and those were huge. For us.
And now Kay Applegate is still writing books that are on summer reading.
Yep.
The one and only Ivan, I believe,
and all the Animorph books are out of print.
Now
I think they've recently got reprintings again, but for a good couple of years they were completely out of print.
There are some reprints that have really nice covers that aren't like the 90s.
I loved those terrible covers.
Those were cool. But those also were, it's a story about kids that can turn into animals. But also, here's horror sci-fi elements and,
sci-fi epic spanning like 37 books.
Yeah, an epic is absolutely the descriptor.
I think one of the great programs that we had running here, and I don't know if she's going to be continuing it, but Christina doing the banned books.
Yeah.
Because we're living in an environment where banning of books is endemic. I mean, it's just all over the place. You can't avoid hearing stories about this book being taken off the shelf, that book being taken off the shelf, and quite often with someone just reading a title and saying the title sounds bad, so we don't want this in the library. And I think it's important that she did something important, saying, well, let's look at the books that they're taking off and see if we can figure out why would they take it off? What is offensive in it? And sometimes you can find a reason. There was recently, one of the great books of my childhood was To Kill a Mockingbird. It's being banned in some libraries. And somebody asked me, why would they ban it? And I said, I know exactly why they would ban it, and it's a reasonable decision. I wouldn't ban it.
No.
But the reason is, it is what I would call in the white savior mode.
Yeah.
The black man will be saved only if a white man comes to his rescue. And Atticus Finch is the hero.
Yeah.
And you know what? Now we want to have stories in which black people take care of themselves, save themselves, change the world themselves. And so while that book that came in the early 60s was important for its moment, and it said something about race that was important to us, but we have to have grown beyond that and say, yes, there was a time when we could say the hero has to be the white man in shining armor who is an Atticus Finch perfect individual. But you know what? We don't need the white man to save everybody. As a matter of fact, they're not doing a very good job of it if that's what they're trying to do.
Not even on that, unfortunately. And I mean, the same could be said in films and things like that. Media has to evolve to meet the realities of the world.
I think some books and movies and whatever can change the world. In my childhood, again, A Raisin in the Sun play came out. What is really significant about A Raisin in the Sun to me, it's about racism. Okay, that's not new. It's about racism in Chicago, in the North.
Yeah.
And in 1959, when that play coming out, we all said, yeah, racism. Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi. And we didn't say Philadelphia, Chicago, Boston. And you know what? It's there too. And that was important to say. Because maybe we knew it, but we didn't consciously deal with it. And now it was like, oh yeah, it's real. And we have to talk about it. We have to deal with it. And we have to recognize it first.
And that's, I think, another great thing of the library is that with these authors changing, books that have new perspectives from all walks of life, the thing about libraries that makes it so special is that they become accessible. The one thing they remove that is a huge barrier is the economic ability to purchase books. Mm-hmm. That barrier is non-existent at the library. And you can come here, if you want to read a book that's controversial, you can do that. And guess what? If you don't like it, you can return it with no cost to you.
As long as you return it on time.
Right, there's some stipulations, of course. But now you can read these. Kids can read books that their parents can't go and buy or wouldn't go and buy.
Yeah.
Kids with computers. I know tons of people who grew up playing RuneScape here in the library.
Sure.
And is that a bad thing? No. You couldn't play it at home because you didn't have a computer. There's that economic barrier. And the library says, no. If you have a card here, you have access.
One of the things I like about how the world has changed here in this library is we have board games. We have Nintendo games. We have all kinds of things that at one point were considered, well, they're not really appropriate for a library. They're just games. They're just play toys. We're here about knowledge and information and other things. And no, that's part of what we need to do. And I do the history for them. So history's got to be brought into this. Jefferson said a country needs a revolution every 20 years. And essentially what he was saying was every generation is different from the generation that went before it. And the answers that you came up with may have been great answers for your time. To Kill a Mockingbird was a great book for the 1960s. It's not the book I would give to someone to read today if I wanted them to talk about the theme of racism in this country. I would say read it for it's a well-written book, read it for the historical context of where it comes from and what it found as the best answer to end racism, have a good white man stand up, but then read another book that says, well, wait a minute, this is the new world that we live in, and a different answer is appropriate for it. And it's one of the things I will struggle with more than you, but I don't struggle with it a lot, is that I have to recognize that the answers that I thought were the right answers are not necessarily the right answers today.
Yeah.
And I have to change with those times. And, I think I do it, but you have to do it consciously. One of the things I have learned in the History Forum is that so much of what I am doing when I am learning history is I'm unlearning the history I learned badly, that I was taught badly. I once took a 6-month class. We're going way off topic. I once took a 6-month class in Uruguay, in Spanish. It was in history of the 20th century. And I read a lot of history and studied a lot of history. If you said what happened from 1950 to 1980s, I would tell you one thing, the Cold War. If you live in any other country in the world, it's decolonization.
Yeah.
Nobody taught me that in school. And it's a bigger story than the Cold War. In the period from 45 to 50, 73 new countries were formed that joined the UN. Why? They had been colonies before, and they broke free. World War II marked the breaking up of the British Empire, the French Empire, the German Empire, the Dutch Empire. Portuguese took longer to break up. But that is the story of the 20th century, and we don't talk about it. Or at least I wasn't taught it. And I had to say, well, these kids, I'm sitting with a bunch of kids who all know this. This is like they knew this from the time they were little. And I didn't. And I thought of myself as well-read in history.
It's hard to get out of your own perspective of these things. I think the first time any of that really entered my head was kind of weird because I grew up with a lot of PBS and they had Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego?
Yep.
And those kids knew everything about geography, and literally, I think it was after the first season, they had to add a disclaimer at the start of the show that these answers were correct when given.
Yes.
Because we were in the middle of the collapse of so many countries.
Yes.
Suddenly it's like, well, turns out that no, that's not Czechoslovakia anymore.
No.
That's...
Someone might say that our conversation has veered away from the library, and I don't think it has. Because if I were to use one word that discusses the importance of libraries, it's conversations.
Yeah.
Library is a place that starts conversations, that changes thinking, that creates dialogues, and those conversations are important in whatever format, whatever medium they take place. And that's really the significance of the library for me. It's the conversations that get started and continued in the building and outside of the building.
I think we're probably coming up on time here. With the library celebrating its 125th anniversary, there's big plans coming in on the growth of the library. Are there any closing remarks, or where do you want to see the library go next?
I think I am at the stage of my life where I am following where it goes. I'm not a leader. There's a time when I was a leader where I was pointing directions, and there's a jazz musician named Thelonious Monk. And Thelonious Monk, and boy, I'm comparing myself to Thelonious Monk, who is a great jazz musician, and I shouldn't be doing this. But somebody saw him playing when he was older, and they say, "You're really playing great, but you're doing the same stuff." He said, "Yeah. When I was 20, I did the new stuff. I broke the barriers. I took people in new directions. Somebody else's turn now." And what I recognize is it's somebody else's turn now. And if I can support and help, happy to do so. But the leadership is in Bill's hands, in Margie's hands, in Lucille's hands, and in your hands, much more than it is in mine. And that is as it should be, because you're of the right age to take the lead. And I would assist in every way I can. But I think that's all I have to say.
There you have it, listeners. Thank you all for listening to the Geek Out podcast. Jeff, if people want to geek out with us here on the show, where can they go?
Well, if you head over to lansdownelibrary.org/podcasts, that's where all of our episodes are hosted for one, and two, there's a nice green register here button you can click. Gives you a little form to fill out. And once you fill that out, let us know that you're interested in talking. We'll hopefully get back to you.
Thank you for listening.